Welcome back, everybody. I hope you didn't have to fight the crowd too terribly bad in the trading post. Seems like we staggered just enough where you all could get in. And I'm hearing that everyone is finding all the drawers and the cabinets and hot, cold food, everything. It's a brilliant idea. I have not seen many hotels that go this direction. It's a brilliant idea. All right, let's get started with our next session. I'm going to invite Rachel McGreevy to join me on the stage, and then we'll have Katya Albanese help us facilitate some dialogue after we have an opportunity to share some information with you. So welcome, Rachel. She's the State Outreach Advisor for the State Exchange on Employment and Disability. I'm just curious, how many of you all have heard about the SEED initiative? Maybe, kind of, one person? Okay. Well, good and bad, right? I want to make sure that we share this information with you all. You all have an opportunity to hear the great work that's going on, and then also make sure that you all have an opportunity to find out how you can engage the SEED team in your individual states. So we're going to talk a little bit about some work around hiring people with disabilities and how that really can impact the labor shortages that we're seeing across the country. And we've had this wonderful opportunity to network and engage and have a formal partnership with the SEED program at NASCA. And we have recently just completed a state collaborative. And with the state collaborative, we have an opportunity to bring together teams from individual states to really serve as a focus group and help us understand the challenges, the issues, and then build toolkits and recommendations around that. So we're going to share a sneak peek with you all today. The toolkit is just about ready to be released. We're going to share some of the state examples that will be highlighted in the report, and then also have Rachel share a little bit more about what SEED is doing and how you can engage with them. So if you all will bring up our PowerPoint for us, please, we will get started. I see a 1, as in 1 second. We'll give them just a second to get our PowerPoint ready to go. But we want to just give you an overview again of the work that's been going on in the states around people with disabilities and how you can make a very deliberate approach and strategy to pull them into not only your recruitment techniques, but ensure that they're well represented across the labor force.
Maybe we'll use the time right now to just give you a quick overview of SEED. I'll pull that from my remarks and then kick it back to you so that you know about SEED and who we are and why we're here. SEED, as Pam mentioned, is the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, and it is a partner with NASCA. It is an initiative funded by the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Disability Employment Policy. And ODEP is a small non-regulatory agency, and they do a lot of policy, research, collecting of data, that sort of thing. And ODEP really wanted to get this information out to states and state policymakers so that states could use the information and customize it in their states to help enact policies that remove barriers to employment, not just in state government, but in the private sector as well. So SEED is here to really partner with NASCA and other state organizations to share this information with you. So it's really an education and outreach initiative. We really value the opportunity to have most valuable informal conversations with you, but this is one that we hope will be a lasting tool for the NASCA membership and your stakeholders and your offices back in your state. This collaboration is really meant to be one where you have information from the federal government that is helpful to you and isn't putting forward something one size fits all or a top down. This is really meant to have the information, get it to the states, and help your state implement inclusive workforce development policies. And we are focused on the disability piece because that's ODEP's mission, but we will talk about why it makes sense for the broader DE&I conversation that we're having here. So we really invite you to participate in this conversation and learn more about how you can include this in your efforts. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Pam. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. So as you can see on the screen here, there are more than 44 million people in the United States who are living with a physical or mental disability. And just think about the number of folks that may be available to fill some of those gaps that you have in your individual states. They're most definitely disproportionately affected in any employment metrics across the board. 8 in 10 were not in the labor force by comparison to 3 in 10 of those people without a physical or mental disability. So a huge discrepancy there between the two groups. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the state as a model employer framework, or states as model employers. Really building around both the policy and the practice implications. Rachel's going to tell you a little bit more about the policy. NASCA really comes into the conversation around the implementation. So we know the legislature and governors enact bills, executive orders, but then it really comes down to those of you who are in the room to do the implementation. So through the NASCA state chief administrators and each of their teams, the work actually gets done. So this is a framework that is a combination of both the critical policy, the written policy, as well as those best practices or innovative practices to ensure that all of the written language gets implemented with fidelity. So this framework that we're going to be sharing with you really just digs into how you take good policy and effective policy and make it work in each of your states. And again, we're really targeting people with disabilities that are looking to come into the state civil service. So that's the goal that we're talking about. And again, so all the jobs that you all are looking at within the states, these are the individuals that we're hoping you take an opportunity to target and to do some outreach. So again, we talked a little bit about the disproportionality when it they're compared to their counterparts without a disability. You can see here, those with disabilities earn $41,716 as compared to $50,264 for those without. So there's definitely a discrepancy there, about $8,500 less. And also the poverty rate. Take a look at those numbers. 25.2% for people with disabilities versus 11.1% for those without disabilities. So definitely some disparities when we're looking at those with disabilities. So here's the roadmap. And this is a roadmap that really covers all of the partners with SEED. And they work with folks like the Council of State Governments, the National Conference of State Legislators, just a bunch of groups that are doing the hard work, the long work around the policy. And again, we're excited to come in and talk about, okay, now that we've got that a really great language, how do we make it happen in each of the states? So in the toolkit, you'll see this list of the different types of strategies and approaches to move towards implementation. What are those formal mechanisms and infrastructures? That really is your deep policy that you want to work around. How you create those strategic plans using surveys, setting goals, looking at studies, data collection, huge when we're looking at any of the HR metrics across the country. DEIA initiatives. Who knows what the A is? Accessibility. Absolutely. You've heard us talk DEIB with Dara around belonging. This is accessibility. Absolutely. Recruitment, hiring, retention, employee engagement, technology, accessible technology, especially in a remote or a hybrid environment, critically important for those with a disability. And then your own teams, looking inward to ensure that you've got disability awareness training available to those that you're working with. Just a couple of examples that we've highlighted in our toolkit we want you to make sure you have an opportunity to dig a little deeper into. The California LEAP initiative. This is a limited examination employment program. It works through their vocational rehab, which has a direct connection to their overall statewide HR program. It's an alternative examination process, really allows people with disabilities to access the civil service workforce in a quicker manner, really looks at their various qualifications versus the classifications of the different states. They become certified by the Department of Rehab as having a disability, and then it's almost an automatic referral from there. Ohio, this is a piece of Policy through their executive order that was created in 2019 required the appointment of a state ADA coordinator. But beyond that, it also digs into training and data collection. So not just an individual put into a role, but then expanding the fact that they need to provide enterprise-wide training. Tennessee, if you haven't taken a look at what they're doing, this is a great campaign. It's called the This Is Me Communications Campaign, and it's all centered around the individual with a disability. They've had all kinds of kickoff events and planning events and very visible events around this campaign to talk about the importance of self-identification. What we've seen so often is that those with disabilities may want to not disclose that, which then does not give them that additional opportunity to be noticed and to be seen. So This Is Me really provides to remove some of those barriers to employment, and it's a great career advancement role for them. Commonwealth of Virginia, they also implemented an alternative hiring process. They're still relatively new into their processes. They started earlier this year, April of 2022. Came directly from the governor's office. We're seeing that top leadership being connected to this is an important component of the work. But they really increased the referrals. In just a few months, they had the Department of Rehab Services getting 250 requests for a certificate of disability with 70 new referrals over to vocational rehab. So quick movement, lots of great things. State of Washington also used an executive order to create the Disability Employment Task Force. They were having some real challenges in finding out who was self-identifying and who wasn't, collecting data around those individuals with disabilities. And so this executive order really moved forward the ability to bring a group of people together. The interesting piece here is that they actually go to customer experience agencies within the state and have them participate in this task force and lend their voice. So some takeaways quickly that we discovered through our collaborative process. Executive leadership has to be a part of this conversation, right? It really does need to start with the leaders. They set the roadmap, the outlook, the mindset, and having those clearly defined goals from the chiefs make it all that more important. Research. Research can be a scary term sometimes, but really digging into what your colleagues are doing around the country. Hopefully an avenue like this gives you an opportunity to share and learn, but really learning from those great works and leaning into those best practices are critically important. Expanding your relationship. So often, and I heard someone say earlier, like it lives in HR. Well, it shouldn't just live in HR, right? Voc Rehab is there. All kinds of other agencies are available and should be directly involved in the conversation. Infrastructures, strategic plans, collecting and analyzing data. We know how critically important this is, but really the whole lifespan of the state civil service to know who's applying, who's being recruited, and actually taking a look at your recruitment notices, your job classification, your job descriptions. All of those pieces are very important as well. Making those targeted outreach to the specific communities. I'm certain that each of your states have disability councils and task forces that you work with, and they can be a wonderful venue to push some of your marketing and campaigns out to those who may be interested in state civil service. And then finally, creating a culture of inclusiveness. We talked about this with both DARA and ACE, and it's just important to take this back. We're talking about a welcoming, a safe environment that creates that sense of belonging, and how important that is because we know states are already competing with the private sector for people, right? So if you're trying to become an employer of choice, making sure that your culture is one that is welcome and open to anyone, especially those with disabilities, is very important as well. All right, Rachel, we'll turn it over to you.
So I think we covered this. Again, I'm Rachel McGreevy. I really appreciate everyone sticking with this session and being here to hear about this. I think the toolkit will be a great resource for everyone, and we're excited to share more about that with you. But Pam, thank you for that overview, and I'm really glad that you highlighted the A with DEI and B and also A, because, and I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about that, because in this, we've been talking about it throughout the meeting, and it's really, disability is part of diversity. Just a few quick points on that, and in terms of the belonging and the intersection, whether we are talking about race or ethnicity or disability, we encounter a range of unique attributes and experiences that contribute to a sense of belonging. This is a huge volume of people. Disability is actually the largest minority group in our country, and it's the third largest market segment. 43.2 million Americans have a disability, and many of those are in their prime employment age. So while that's a huge number, demographics do not translate into employment. And just as a quick note, when we're talking about disability, we're talking about any disability. Someone who was born with a disability, acquire a disability, injured in the workforce, developmental, mental health, substance use disorder, our nation's disabled veterans. That's who we're talking about. And when we're talking about all of these different groups, it really is all of us. 1 in 5 working age Americans has a disability, and most of us will experience a disability at some point in our lives. So it's critical that we're raising it up and talking about it as part of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. But where is exactly the intersectionality of disability with other marginalized communities? 3 in 10 American Indian and Alaskan Natives have a disability. 1 in 4 Black Americans have a disability. 1 in 5 white Americans have a disability. And 1 in 6 Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders have a disability. It's also the same for Hispanics, 1 in 6. 1 in 10 Asians have a disability, and 1 in 4 women have a disability. So as you can gather from these stats, disability is an identity that cuts across all other and is one group that you can join at any time. So with all that being said, the most timely piece of this conversation is the fact that states are dealing with the Great Resignation, the silver tsunami, and the challenges of the ongoing COVID recovery. So as your states are building out DEI and B in your states and in your organizations, we hope that you will engage the A in this effort for accessibility and include people with disabilities in filling the gaps and be part of the jobs solution. The toolkit that Pam laid out will hopefully help you accomplish that, if to the extent that you're already working on this in your states or carrying it forward at different levels of engagement. We hope to motivate you to learn more about why it is not only a great idea to include people with disabilities in recruiting and retention in state employment, but it also produces results. Individuals with disabilities have lower turnover rates, lower medical expenses, and time off requests compared to non-disabled employees. And the Society for Human Resource Management, which represents over 300,000 human resource professionals, have surveyed their members about hiring and retaining people with disabilities and report that 97% of HR professionals say that employees with disabilities regularly perform the same or better than their peers without disabilities. So I think we all appreciate that diversity brings value to organizations, and that value is directly to the bottom line. Diverse organizations are 35% more likely to financially outperform their competitors. So when you're looking to stretch your resources in state government and in your organizations, this is just smart to do. People with disabilities, this is just another, I think, really interesting fact to share as we're talking about the Great Resignation, that during the pandemic, people with disabilities and throughout this Great Resignation that we're going through in terms of a realignment of the workforce, people with disabilities remained engaged in the labor market throughout the pandemic, throughout the Great Resignation, the labor force participation rate did not drop. And it's actually hovering above its historic high. So that's good news for people with disabilities because there was more opportunity for them because of these other pressure points happening in the labor market, but we need to keep it going. So there's the rationale. There's the intersectionality. We hope that as you move forward in your states that you will not view disability as a special effort or a siloed effort, just really include it because it really is all of us. And building on that, I think that getting back to what SEED does as a federally funded initiative, we're a great resource. We're a great resource for you with this toolkit, but also to kind of be a point of sharing information that can be helpful to states, bringing it into your practices and strategies in your state. And I think one thing that the federal government has recently done that is very interesting and is a model for states is the executive order that President Biden signed last summer, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. And so this lays out a policy that the federal government must be a model. And it's a priority for the administration. It establishes the expectation that DEIA will become integrated into each agency's overall agenda, priorities, and strategic planning. This is Executive Order 14035. It is out there for any state to tap into and look at as a model. But this is really huge because it's the first time that accessibility has been included along with diversity, equity, and inclusion to describe an initiative at the federal level for cultivating a workforce that reflects people's different backgrounds, cultures, and experiences. So what is this really saying? By including, what is concluding accessibility along diversity, equity, and inclusion? It's sending the message that people with disabilities are included along with racial and ethnic minorities, women, and other underserved communities. And DEI initiatives at the initial design stage is not as an afterthought, and people with disabilities are at the table when those decisions are being made. So that's sort of the framework of the executive order. We hope that more states step up and with the model employer framework. We have some great examples. We hope to hear from you today about where you are on this journey and how we can work together really at the end of the day. And how one way that we might do that is through, in the month of October, it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and the theme is disability, part of the equity equation. And the NASCA toolkit will be rolling out during NDEAM, so that is really a nice way to tie that all together. And the Department of Labor has actually right on the website a whole bullet list of suggestions for how your state can celebrate NDEAM. And I think it's just a way to get people engaged in the workforce, accomplishing your workforce alignment objectives. And we really hope that through our partnership with NASCA and the toolkit that we can really engage you in NDEAM and help you support your workforce. Those were some of the highlights that we wanted to talk about in terms of SEED and what we do and how we're connected to the federal government. But just one quick example, Pam mentioned the state of Tennessee. And I wanted to mention this because I think it illustrates just how SEED works with states and how you can really rely on SEED in your own state. There was legislation to pass state as a model employer. The state senator, who was the bill author, did the whole, legislative process, got the governor to sign it. Okay, great, now what do we do? So the senator asked for her agency leadership, the Human Resource Department in Tennessee, to get in touch with SEED and just say, how did other states implement this? And so we sent the agency whatever information they requested. They wanted examples, and it was kind of the leadership from the legislature coming in and saying, hey, we know this initiative has a lot of good information, but it's really just a phone call to say, hey, what information do you have on this? And we share it with you, you digest it, get back to us, and then we can provide further customization in terms of like responding to your unique situation in your own state. So that's what we worked on the state of Virginia as well, and we've been working with Washington. SEED really does work in most states, but that Tennessee is a really nice example because we were on the phone with the agency a lot. So that's just sharing that with you as an example. And I would like to also take this opportunity to recognize my colleague, Katya Albanese, who's the project director for SEED, and had the Department of Labor on the other line. So she's here, but has been here throughout the conference and is really leading this effort. So we wanted to take the last couple minutes and just, Katya, may I call on you to just say maybe a couple things, and then we can open it up?
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and sorry that I was late. Had another presentation that ran over. But on similar stay at work, state as a model employer, which is really a really important issue at this time. I mean, you're all dealing with that DEI, the DEI efforts, and but it's all about state employment and being inclusive to all. And so again, just reiterating what Rachel said, we're here because we want to ensure that disability is part of your diversity efforts. So we heard a lot about the DEIB, but we're DEIA-B. We want to make sure that A is in there, and access for all really means access for all. And it's an awesome opportunity. Like Rachel mentioned, it's the first time we're seeing the trends, right? We're seeing DEI in states. We're seeing states really look at their own employment programs to diversify their workforce, and they need to, because they're, the Great Resignation, et cetera. And I don't know if either Pam or Rachel mentioned this, but when you talk about the Great Resignation, there was a lot of concern in the pandemic that the disability population would leave the workforce. And they did in the recession, and it was the group that took the longest to get back to pre-recession employment levels. But that actually didn't happen. And people with disabilities didn't participate in the Great Resignation like other groups did. And in fact, people with disabilities have a higher employment rate now than they did from all the way back when we first started collecting information on people with disabilities. So it's really important to acknowledge that when you're trying to build strong, loyal workforces, that and retain your employees. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. So, do we want to take questions? Do you want to open the discussion?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Or because we can ask you questions too.
Well, and we didn't prompt her on this, but I would love for Teresa to share a little bit more about what she's doing.
Yeah, so I know a lot about that, and I think autism at work in the public sector is something to really, if you could tell us all about it, that'd be great.
You're going to have to give me a time limit, or we're toast. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I'll start with what we do. So MITRE has two programs that are neurodiversity focused, and neurodiversity is about diversity of our neurons. We're all different. Neurodivergence is when our difference is a little more different than everybody else's differences and causes issues. So that's going to be autism especially. We're sort of targeting that one. ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, there's a bunch of those. Our internal program is called the Portal Project, and that's our internship program. We recruit from universities and colleges that have really strong autism support programs and use them as our back-end sort of job support. Recruit them in for normal internships. They're just doing normal work, but we spend a lot of time training the people around them, training their managers, training their coworkers, basically how not to be a tool to your coworkers who are on the spectrum. And then the other side of that is the neurodiverse federal workforce, which is where we train the feds how to take the autism at work model, which is a little bit bigger than what we do, and translate that into Fed. So we've run one pilot at NGA, which is National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We will when they sign the paperwork, be working with another unnamed agency until they sign the paperwork within DHS. They've had the paperwork for over a year now, so we'll see. But just helping them translate that, what's happening in industry, into Fed, because it's a different world. But the basics of it is changing your job recs, which we talked about quite a bit, just simplifying them, because people who are underserved are used to reading themselves out, and so they're going to look for reasons to read themselves out, so you take out as much as you can. And then training up for interviews, because people who are on the spectrum do not make eye contact. They do not chit-chat. How are you today? What does that even mean? Like, I need a literal. And unlike everyone else, when they interview, is not going to tell you everything they know, because if they can't write a book on it, they don't think they know it. So teaching you how to draw that out. And then teaching you what neurodiversity means, what are some hallmarks, what are some ways to give instruction, what are some ways to give feedback, what are some ways to change how you talk with each other and about situations and ways to build teams. And then we check in with the students for us regularly to make sure they're okay, and check in with the managers to see if they have any questions. So some really important takeaways that we've gotten out of that, neurodiversity opens all doors. Nobody doesn't like to hear about neurodiversity. So far, probably because it's fairly new, nobody has those walls of defensiveness or guilt that come with most of the other kinds of diversity because it's new. Almost everybody knows somebody or loves somebody on the autism spectrum. I personally don't know anybody who is profoundly blind, but I know lots of folks, well, of course I know lots of folks who are on the spectrum, but almost how many of you know somebody well who is on the autism spectrum? How many of you know somebody well who is missing a limb? You see the difference? So, and we're in DEI, so we're gonna know more, but it opens all doors. And all the strategies apply to everyone. Everyone needs clear instruction. Everyone needs a chance to be judged by what they're good at. Everybody needs flexibility in the workplace. Nobody likes the smell of fish coming out of that microwave, that flickering light bulb. It ticks everybody off. The difference is thriving or surviving. Your folks on the spectrum are not gonna survive if you don't fix that. So that's a great excuse to fix things. It opens all doors. It's a great excuse to fix things. And starting small with our internship is a really, really low cost, low intimidation way to bring in those principles that they need anyway for all the other types of DEI, and makes your leadership look great, which means they keep supporting it. So,
I think what we're talking about there a lot is universal design, and that's also part of the resources in the toolkit. When you raise up one group, you raise up everybody. So we really definitely promote that the universal design elements in hiring practices, because it truly does help everyone. So that's how we like to talk about this, is it's not a special thing. People with disabilities are not a subgroup. They are every American, and so we really appreciate this conversation and the opportunity. Probably running out of time, but just one last chance. If anybody had anything to add or wanted to ask a question, please ask for the mic. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Look for our toolkit in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, so much, and Katya as well.